Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you. My name is Roger Bissessar. I'd like to welcome you to our program, Our Islam, Peace, Not Hostility. This is a program brought to you by the Ahmadiyya Anjuman Ishati Islam Incorporated of Trinidad and Tobago. I have the privilege today of delivering our talk. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Qul huwallahu ahad, Allahu samad, lam yalid wa lam yalad, wa lam yakul lahu kufuwan ahad. I bear witness, first of all, that nothing deserves to be worshipped but Allah, and I bear witness that the Holy Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, was his last and final messenger. I begin in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Brothers and sisters all, Assalamu alaikum. Our talk today is part 2 of the topic, King Solomon, a Quranic perspective. And in part 1 of this talk, we would have dealt with certain aspects of the life of King Solomon as taken from chapter 27 of the Holy Qur'an. Just to summarize briefly as we build into today's talk, in part 1, there were 7 key points we dealt with. And these included 1, Solomon being the son of King David. 2, Solomon being a great king, who extended the kingdom of David. 3, a hallmark quality of Solomon was wisdom. 4, he was an excellent administrator and a strategist. 5, he led and managed a vast empire and employed the best workers from foreign lands. 6, he was a very humble person. And 7, he focused on extending the spiritual kingdom of God. So these were some of the main points we dealt with in the last discussion. In today's talk, we will be dealing with a very important historical personality, right, that is mentioned in the realm and in the life of the Prophet Solomon. And today we will be dealing with the Queen of Sheba. Who was the Queen of Sheba, and why is she important? The Queen of Sheba, and some sources, her name is referred to as Balkis. Balkis is mentioned in the scriptures of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Today's talk will be taken and dealt with strictly from a Quranic perspective. And there are 7 points that we will be dealing with in this part 2 of the Solomon, from the Quranic perspective. Point number 1, the Queen of Sheba, Balkis, the ruler of the land of Sheba. This location, historically, whether it's near to Yemen or Ethiopia, touch base on her. 2, at the time of the discourse and in the narrative that the Quran presents here, she initially was a worshipper of the sun. 3, she was one who was seeking knowledge as well, in terms of understanding the forces of the world and the forces of the universe. So she was a seeker of knowledge. 4, she traveled to the kingdom of Solomon in terms of to learn from this king and to understand and even to challenge to some extent the king. And 5, she sent gifts to Solomon in advance to her in advance of her arrival. 6th point, we will deal with the meeting itself of the Queen of Sheba between Balkis and Solomon. And the 7th point will be the acceptance of Islam by Balkis. This is a very, very important narrative, and for today's talk, I'm probably going to do a different style of talk, because to understand this narrative, to understand this history, I'll probably need to read a bit, from chapter 27 of the Holy Qur'an. I'll be reading from verses 22 to 44. All right, I'll try as best so that you could follow, and along the way, we could discuss this narrative of the Queen of Sheba. In chapter 27 of the Holy Qur'an, and we would have touched on 27 a bit last week, but we continue with chapter 27 today, this time starting from verses 22. And it starts here, and I quote, "And he tarried not long then said, I have compassed that which thou hast not compassed, and I have come to thee from Saba, with sure information. Now, Saba is the Arabic word in the Quran's reference to Sheba. So when you say, I have come from Saba, it's a messenger coming to Solomon. And it's a conversation happening here, where he's going to relay what he has seen in this foreign land. This foreign land known as Sheba. In verse 23 it goes on, I found a woman ruling over them, and she has been given of everything, and she has a mighty throne. So very early here, the Quran is giving a historical narrative of a woman in leadership, a queen, ruling a vast empire. And now this person is a messenger relaying to Solomon, who himself is ruling even a greater empire. But this messenger is referring to him that the land has a queen who rules over them. It's an extensive empire. And it goes on. I found her and her people adoring the sun instead of Allah. So very early here, and I mean all the scriptures and all the history we would look at, different parts of the world and different civilizations, what we know as nature worship. People would worship the sun, people would worship the stars, people would worship the moon. Different cultures, different tribes. So this particular tribe, the messenger is saying to Solomon, I found her and her people adoring the sun instead of Allah. And the devil has made their deeds fair seeming to them, and turned them from the way, so they go not aright. Right? So it's clearly saying to him here, they're worshipping the wrong thing. They're worshipping the sun. It goes on, so that they worship not Allah. It reiterates the point. So that they worship not Allah, who brings forth what is hidden in the heavens and the earth, and knows what you hide and what you proclaim. So the messenger, in relating the narrative, is also glorifying Almighty Allah in saying they worship not Allah who brings forth what is hidden. And it goes on further, it says in verse 26, Allah, there is no God but He, the Lord of the mighty throne. I started to talk with reading a very short verse, short chapter of the Holy Qur'an that deals with the oneness of Almighty Allah. And that's why I chose to read that particular chapter today, a very short chapter of the Holy Qur'an, but it reiterates and reinforces the oneness of Almighty Allah. So in this conversation between messenger and king, you have, he's relating to this, what's happening with these people. He said, he being Solomon now, we shall see whether thou speakest the truth or whether thou art a liar. So he's telling the messenger, I'm going to test what you're saying, if it's true or not. Take this, my letter, and hand it over to them. And then turn from them and see what answer they return. So the King Solomon now is dispatching a message to Balkis, the Queen of Sheba. He's sending an official correspondence. This is one head of state to the other. Right? Official communication happening here now. Right. In verse 29 it goes on, it says here, now this is she now, is referring to Balkis receiving the letter, and she's talking to her council. She said, O chiefs, an honorable letter has been delivered to me. It is from Solomon. It is in the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. So she's talking to her council. She's saying this letter is referring to Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. And it's proclaiming, it goes on in verse 31, it says here, proclaiming, exalt not yourself against me and come to me in submission. So the queen now, the verses go on here. And in it's chapter 32 to 35, we'll continue this discussion. We're going from the Quran. This narrative is happening, a very extensive narrative. It starts with the messenger telling Solomon what he has seen. Solomon dispatching a letter to the kingdom of, to the queen receiving the letter. The queen starts now, she's talking to her council, and she said, O chiefs, advise me respecting my affair. I never decide an affair until you are in my presence. So she seeks advice from her council, right? The role of advisors are to give advice. The role of leaders is to listen to the advice and choose if to follow that advice or if to go down a different path. A lot of people don't understand that sometimes. Leaders have advisors. Advisors' role are to advise as best as possible. The leader will take the best advice, and if all of the advice given it doesn't make any sense, the leader will make their own decision. So this is what is happening here. This dynamic is happening here as the queen. She asked her council, advise me. They said, referring to the council, we are possessors of strength and possessors of mighty prowess, and the command is thine. So consider what thou wilt command. We, meaning the empire of Sheba, we are a mighty people, we are possessors of strength. As queen, we stand by your decision, because the decision is yours. They're referring here. So Sheba, the Queen of Sheba goes on now, and she says here in verse 34, and the narrative, as I'm reading, this is the narrative straight from the Quran. She said, surely the kings, when they enter a town, ruin it, and make the noblest of its people to be low. And thus they do. Right? So she's telling her council that, kings have their way of they come into a town and, they can ruin it. So she's going to take a decision now here. And her decision is this. And verse 35, it goes on, 35 onwards it states, this is the queen herself saying now, and surely I am going to send them a present, and to see what answer the messengers bring back. So she decides to test Solomon. She must have heard he's such a wise king. She's going to send him a present before she arrives. Right? And the Quran deals with this present in detail, and I will spend a little time on it so that we could, as best as possible, understand this present that is sent to Solomon, Solomon's reaction to the present, and then the conversation that happens between him and Balkis. And when the envoy came to Solomon, he said, will you help me with wealth? But what Allah has given me is better than that which what He has given you. Nay, you are exultant because of your present. Now, the gift comes to Solomon, and it basically here he's saying to his counselor, he's saying to himself, the message on this gift, it's as it were a coded message to him that, will you help me with wealth? And then he proclaims, but what Allah has given me is better than that which He has given you. There's a lot of debate, a lot of interpretation on this, and I'm going to give my take on this, right? The Quran itself later on in the verse talks about a throne being presented to Solomon, that the queen sent a throne with intricate carvings and intricate painting and different aspects of it that was very offensive to Solomon. Some claim it was suggestive artwork that it got him offended. It may have been. But the level of that he's enraged and the verses that come here, what Allah has given me is better than what He has given you. And it asks, before that says, will you help me with wealth? I believe what is happening here, that the queen herself extended an invitation to him to come across to sun worship. She, through her gift and through the messaging of it and what is said on it, she's basically telling him, join me in my faith system, and together we can grow our wealth. And he's like, my wealth has come from my Lord and my concepts and belief. So he gets very angry. You have to respect the fact with the Quran is that it also shows you that with all the prophets of God, the humanness in them, they have emotions. So in this case, they will get angry. They're not like in a state where they don't. He gets angry. The Quran now, in the verses of the Quran from verses 37 all the way to 41, go into detail in the conversation that goes on about this particular gift. So I'm going to read it as slowly as I could, and we will go through it, right? So Solomon says, go back to them, so we shall certainly come to them with hosts which they have no power to oppose, and we shall certainly expel them therefrom in disgrace, while they are abased. He said, O chiefs, which of you can bring me her throne before they come to me in submission? Now, this part of the Quran here, he's talking in an angry tone here that he can send his army, he could take over that kingdom, right? But he doesn't do it. It's like when we ourselves get upset, we may say something like, you know, you could do this, you could do that. But I think when he calms down, he does not, and the history justifies this, he does not unleash his army onto the queen and her kingdom. He does not use force, he does not use violence, he does not use this approach to deal with this, situation at hand. He asks for them, who can bring me her throne? And this is one aspect I'm going to go literal, because the verses that follow a little bit talk a little bit about the throne being not the, taking her throne from her, but the physical gift that she has sent, which is presented as a throne with intricate carvings and something that is offensive to Solomon. One audacious among the jinn said, and this is verse 39, I will bring it to thee before thou rise up from thy place, and surely I am strong, trust thee for it. Now in the last talk in part 1, we talk a little bit about the jinn being sometimes hidden from the view of the public, powerful personalities, advisors to the king. So jinn here is not some mysterious creature the Quran is referring to here. Jinn is a powerful person, in essence an advisor to the king, or part of his council, telling him, someone who is audacious in saying that I can sort it out. Another one of them, in this verse 40 goes on, one having knowledge of the book said, I will bring it to thee in the twinkling of an eye. Then when we saw it settled beside him, he said, this is of the grace of my Lord, that he may try me whether I am grateful or ungrateful. And whoever is grateful, he is grateful only for his own soul. And whoever is ungrateful, then surely my Lord is self-sufficient, bountiful. Solomon logics that this is a test, so that this gift and this invitation, and I believe the invitation here being for him to come across to the worshipping of the sun, he refuses. He knows it's a test, and he's dealing with it. In verse 41 it goes on, and he said, alter her throne for her. We may see whether she follows the right way or is of those who go not aright. Right? So he gives the command, the gift that comes to him, he says, alter the throne. So when she came, so this now we're building up now when, from these 3 verses, 42 to 44, it's building up now for the actual meeting, the 2 of them, Balkis and Solomon. And when she came, it was said, was thy throne like this? She's questioned and she's asked. Now they have altered the throne, right? So she would know that there are some changes on the throne. The question is asked to her, was thy throne like this? She said, it is as it were the same. And we were given knowledge before about it, and we submitted. Now, the Quran says here, we were given knowledge about it, meaning that she knew the throne was altered. She knew that it was offensive to him. She recognizes that, and she says, it's as it were the same. Even you change it, my intention was to test you, you change it so it's as it were the same, right? I have knowledge that it was offensive, she knows it. But the thing is, she's still a worshiper of the sun. So at this point in time, she recognizes that, okay, she's offended Solomon, but she has not yet accepted Islam because she still has a belief system in worshipping the sun. Verse 43 says, and that which she worshipped besides Allah prevented her, for she was of a disbelieving people. So she could not yet have been a convert or come across to Islam. She was still worshipping the sun. And it builds up to the chapter, verse 44, 27-44, where it goes like this. It was said to her, enter the palace. But when she saw it, she deemed it to be a great expanse of water, and prepared herself to meet the difficulty. He said, surely it is a palace made smooth with glass. Now we have to remember, we've been talking, this is the second talk we're doing on Solomon. We need to reiterate, for example, that he was a very wealthy king, a very powerful king. So it's not hard to conceptualize that he has a palace with a glass floor that with water, flowing underneath it. I'm sure for the many of our viewers who have traveled extensively, you must have come across some location where there's a glass floor with water underneath, right? The Quran is actually referring here and giving in very detail. We've been reading, most of this talk has been me reading, which is a different style I've taken today, for like 20 verses of the Quran. There's straight reading from the Quran with narrative. But 44 now says here, he said, it is a palace made smooth with glass. Now let me start it over and we'll deal with it again. It was said to her, enter the palace. But when she saw it, she deemed it to be a great expanse of water. So you have to visualize the imagery. She's walking into the palace. She's looking at the water flowing. So she believes it's water. She's going to be in difficulty. She's hesitating. And Solomon says to her, it is glass. It is smooth. It is safe to walk on. Come. When she walks, she realizes it. And then the next part of the verse goes on. She said, my Lord, surely I have wronged myself, and I submit with Solomon to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. I'll repeat that. She said, my Lord, surely I have wronged myself, and I submit with Solomon to Allah, the Lord of the worlds. The wisdom and the logic and the knowledge of Solomon here is that recognizing that she is searching for knowledge and recognizing he can't just argue with her. He created an effective visual to demonstrate to her, you're fearful that the force underneath is there, but you're walking on the glass. The real force is underneath, which is the water. She realized, I have been worshiping the sun, when the real force, like the water underneath the glass, is Almighty Allah. So it came to her. It came to her immediately what the message was that Solomon was telling her. That, you've been worshipping the wrong thing. Right? You're mistaken, in this case, you're mistaken the glass for water. You're mistaken the objects that are outward for the real force of the universe. And the sun was an outward object, just like the glass. The real force is Almighty Allah. So the Quran here, it in essence gives us a very detailed, discussion here on Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. There are other verses of the Quran that go into detail with this, and perhaps we may have to do a part 3, depending on the feedback I get, whether we want to have a little more discussion on this topic. And there's one more verse I'll read from. It's taken from a different part of the Quran, actually. So we have to go back to, a whole earlier part of the Quran in chapter 2 of the Holy Qur'an. And this is taken from chapter 2, verse 102. And it says here, and they follow what the devils fabricated against the kingdom of Solomon. And Solomon disbelieved not, but the devils disbelieved, teaching men enchantment. I touch on this verse because, as I mentioned a little bit in the last talk, and I talked a little bit this time, you cannot talk about the Prophet Solomon without touching on the topic that there's a lot of dark magic and all type of forces associated with his practice, which is not something he himself practiced. Those around him, probably around his court, like if you look at a kingdom, those in court, those who may probably have dabbled. Solomon himself, the Quran, you look at this, it's very clear. The source of his power, the source of his knowledge, the source of his wisdom came from his belief and complete submission to Almighty God. And it is a testimony and a whole sermon to us, his life, where he has all that the world has to offer. He has wealth, he has all the resources, all that. He demonstrates humility, and he uses his resources and forces for good and the benefit of humanity. Some of the lessons we could take here from this talk, and as I said, as I close the talk, let me just summarize a bit what we would have touched on. The Queen of Sheba, Balkis, right? She came from the land, which is that peninsula between Yemen and Ethiopia. Initially, she was a worshipper of the sun, but she was also one seeking knowledge. She was a genuine seeker of knowledge. She traveled to the kingdom of Solomon to learn from the great king, but she also tested him, where she sent a gift to him that turned out to be very offensive to him. And it was a message inviting him to come across to sun worship. But he, being the wise king that he was, found another way to deal with it. The meeting of the Queen of Sheba and Solomon, we touched on it a little bit, and then her eventual acceptance of Islam. One of the main points as I close, how do we apply all of this in our life in this modern world? We will come across people who have different belief systems, different outlooks from us. Violence and force is not an option, right? Through logic, through conversation, through sharing, examples, that is the best way to really share knowledge, or to, even if you want to give somebody, if you're trying to convince somebody effectively with what you're saying, that is the route you have to take. And that is one lesson, if you look at the last 22 verses that I would have read and spent some time on, between Balkis and Solomon, a sparring between two personalities, two leaders, probably of similar intellect, the whole approach of dealing with a situation here, right? And Solomon's approach to getting her to understand the message. That is something we can apply in our lives, and as we ourselves continue in extending the spiritual kingdom that has started by great prophets like Solomon and others before us. I thank you for viewing, and look forward to you joining us next week for another program of Our Islam, Peace, Not Hostility. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you.
This program was sponsored by Central Precision Engineering Rebuilders Limited of 82 to 84 Guaracara Tabakiti Road, Gasparillo, specializing in machine shop works and heavy-duty engine rebuilding with decades of experience. Suppliers of heavy-duty engine parts, Donaldson filters, and sole authorized dealer for Perkins diesel engines in Trinidad and Tobago.